All right, good evening, everyone. System Chalk here with the 142nd episode of Book of Hours, playing as the artist on YouTube, our first run through YouTube. And unfortunately, I did click the name day riddle between ending the previous recording and this one, so we'll just pick that up and look at it right now. A deceptively intricate riddle that might just teach us who we really are. Gervenius van Loren was notoriously fond of these. Is this the way to the wood? But perhaps the wood is not a suitable place for a librarian. So our focus for today was to get... Sorry, still recovering. Our focus for today has been leveling up transformations and liberations, and essentially we have all the parts we need. So we need 8 elements... Sorry, we have all the hard-to-get parts that we need. So we need 8 memories. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We need 3 more. But those are going to be ones that potentially Mrs. Kill can give us. That would be the impulse, the regret, or the impulse, regret, or impulse, regret, or foresight. Sorry, like the obvious fourth one. Impulse, regret, or foresight. So in the worst case scenario, we don't get any of those over the course of the day, and we just apply the 3 elements of the soul. As Mrs. Kill winds up giving, as Mrs. Kill gives us these memories, it'll free up these elements of the soul for other activities, either crafting something or... Oh, you know what? This was the one that I forgot. Blue crown and sea holly in summer. Well, maybe we can get some sea holly. But yeah, anyways, that's going to be the plan. Essentially, we'll use the elements of the soul to get other things as the opportunity arises. But if Mrs. Kill doesn't wind up giving us any of the memories that we need, we still have a contingency. And of course, if I was playing this... a little bit more like a new player might, where I haven't been as stingy with the lessons. And just to be clear too, sorry, I'll talk a little bit about the lessons after this. Yeah, normally there'd be many more elements of the soul to work with, and so as a consequence, I wouldn't have quite the same need to hoard elements of the soul. Essentially, that's kind of an imposition from just kind of a fun little restriction I put on myself. There's really no other explanation for it, really. I could offer help with correspondence and arithmetic. There's no school in Brandkrug, and not everyone here knows their letters. So one of the ways that I used to, not even used to think about it, but kind of one of the original motivations for playing this way was in the beta. And once I sort of realized there were some permanent decisions that you needed to make, I sort of had this regret minimization approach to committing memories. But I think also some of that was born out of the idea that I could only use the lesson learned to level up the same type of skill. And it was pretty clear after a while that that wasn't the case, that you in fact just need to match one of the aspects. So that basically gave me some more options as far as using lessons learned. Unexpected finds in the folds of the earth and sky. So, one of the cases where, one of the things I would want to avoid would be something like, okay, I lock in Inks of Revelation, and I've already put it in the Tree of Wisdom, so there isn't there isn't quite the same reason to level it up, at least as far as placing things in the Tree of Wisdom, and Wisdom's getting more elements of the soul. Once you commit it, you don't have that reason. In the end, you probably want to advance other skills if your main goal is to push things higher up into the Tree of Wisdoms. But you don't close yourself off from that, right? You have the option of leveling up. So, let's say I put in Inks of Revelation, I could use those lessons that I find to level up any lantern or moth. So it's not like I make it harder to be able to commit things to the Tree of Wisdoms. Likewise, I might turn around and say it's like, well, I don't want to commit certain things early because, then something like Inks of Revelation, which will maybe give me some Incastum Terminale or otherwise helpful crafting, something like Edict's Marshal, for instance. Edict's Marshal is very useful because it's the thing that allows you to get the Wormwood Dream as well as the Old Wound. So it's a nice source of some fairly strong memories, persistent ones at that. So, maybe you want to have a high level of that, and you'd be reluctant to put it inside the Tree of Wisdoms. Well, even then, right, there's no rule saying that you can't upgrade. You can't upgrade those. It might be a little less efficient, so if you know in advance which ones you want to have at the highest level, being able to build your Tree of Wisdoms around that. But, to be completely honest with you, I'm not accomplishing that with my current, match the name of the lesson to the skill anyway, right? I'm not getting that, so why would I discount that in terms of it? So really, this is just, a way that I play. It might even have, to a certain extent, it kind of had its origins in a misunderstanding of how the game works, or maybe it was just different in the beta. I don't even remember that detail, to be honest. And then that slowly morphed towards, okay, this is actually kind of an interesting little challenge. Let's see how far I can go with this. And this time here, I don't want to be too strict in terms of how I'm committing elements of the soul, but there are actually some things that I would like to, committing skills, but there are actually some things I'd like to do with the Tree of Wisdoms. So with all of that in mind, I'm still being a little cautious in terms of how I'm committing these things. But just to be clear, just because I'm playing this way, if you're into this game and you are really feeling like you're constrained in terms of elements of the soul just because of the way I've been playing, do feel free to commit things to the Tree of Wisdoms. The only thing I would just point out is that there's actually lots of interesting things to check out. In fact, I would say that this is probably not the way I would commit things to the Tree of Wisdoms, the way that I've been playing lately now. I'd probably do things a bit differently in the future, but that's a separate conversation for another time. But yeah, the only thing I just point out is that if you are into the lore of the game, just keep in mind that there are different descriptions based on how you enter it in. So it's not just about the elements of the soul that you get, but what, which of these aspects do you think is a little bit more, what's primary for quenchings and quellings? And I definitely feel like this is the sort of thing that I think is most interesting in terms of role-playing games, right? It's not so much that you're doing it because this will get you a good outcome in the game. You're doing it because you feel that this is who you are or what you prioritize. Sand. An hourglass, of course, is sand contained by sand. Sea-strewn, salt-snared stuff. So, one... Oh, this is interesting. A wind rumor. So it doesn't help me out in terms of the in terms of my current goal, but it's neat. I don't always get these. If a cloud were a canvas, who spread it? If the sky were a sheet, who knotted it? A wind rumor is an auspice found in the sky by those who look too long, interpretable only by the wise. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. So I was going to give an example. This may not be the best example, because I honestly wish that I did more tabletop role-playing than I actually do, but as I'm always fond of saying, tabletop experiences are discrimination against the lonely. But I listen to the Designer Notes podcast every now and again. And there's a very interesting pattern among some of the developers. So, I mean, the people who are interviewed are generally of a certain age, and it's not necessarily that these are people who sort of grew up playing video games all their life, or at the very least, they did that alongside other nerdy hobbies. And what's interesting is that where you would think that there would be certain games that came out roughly around the time that those developers would have been growing up, they're not always featured in terms of that, in terms of those interviews. But what does come up a lot is Dungeons and Dragons. And there's something very interesting about that, because if you think of the idea of being sort of, a dungeon master or, playing those kinds of games, to a certain extent, you can see how that would be a game, which is giving you the ability to sort of build your own game, right? You're getting used to telling these kinds of stories, or you're getting used to, building this world, or trying to even, just trying to spin a good yarn and entertain your friends. There's a whole number of ways that you can sort of spin that. But it's one of these things that doesn't seem obvious when you first look at it. And the more you think about it, the more it really does feel that it's appropriate that so many of these game designers who would go on to, to find success did get their start in Dungeons & Dragons. Trumpeters Lily, a glorious efflorescence of sunset orange. In autumn, before the real chill comes, Trumpeter's Lily still flourishes. But another game that's really caught my imagination, and it's not even... I've never played it, but it's Traveller. I think I'm trying to remember if I talked about this on stream or on this broadcast. And what intrigues me about Traveller is the fact that there seems to be less emphasis on things like experience points, and to a certain extent, because of sort of the planet generation and just sort of the themes of what the game is about, it definitely feels a lot more like a toolbox for creating a game, like creating your own science fiction game, as opposed to necessarily, running an adventure module with your, with your players or something like that. And the reason I point that out is it makes me think a little bit of how I react to Book of Hours and Cultist Simulator. Because to a certain extent, we're very familiar with the idea of, Baldur's Gate is a massively successful game. It's winning all the awards. And we're familiar with this convention of, you perform actions, you do well, you get experience points, number go up, you get a bigger level, you become more powerful, you take on more enemies. It's, it's a very gamey way of doing things, and people really enjoy it, right? Man, Mrs. Kill's been really delivering. So I'll do one more round with her just to see if we can get the impulse, but otherwise, I'm in pretty good shape. So Mrs. Kill has seen more of the world than she usually lets on. Conversations with her yield the occasional surprise. But the thing to remember is that this is not the only way of doing RPGs or doing games. And it is kind of interesting because in the case of Book of Hours more so, I would say. So I really feel like this is a great way of doing something that's kind of like skills and experience, but something that rings a lot truer to how learning works in the real world, which I like a lot, especially, again, because this is a game about sort of the, not just accumulation, but also the organization of knowledge. But I also think it's fair to say that, this is not a game which is about experience points. And even in the case of Cultist Simulator, sure, you can level up your health and your knowledge, or your reason and your passion, but that's about it, right? It's very different from being, a warrior and being able to, have more hit points as a result. Well, actually, I guess in the case of Hell, that is quite literally more hit points, but, I think you can see the difference between the two. And so, again, I think one of the things that captures my imagination in terms of Traveller is just this idea about something that's focused on delivering a very specific kind of experience for people. And how that translates into, again, a focus on a story, a focus on, building a world or building a particular experience for people. And because it's not always spoken in the same breath as other things that I'm more familiar with, like Dungeons & Dragons, it really does kind of, I don't know, it really does have a kind of hold on my imagination. So whenever I see an RPG that does things outside of the standard model, let's say, I kind of take notice. So again, I realize this is for a number of people, this is going to be like, why on earth is he talking about this during a Book of Hours stream? To me, this makes sense and it's consistent with where it goes through. But I also appreciate that, you know, this may not really make a whole lot of sense. Anyways, I'm done the point. But I don't know. Hopefully, there's a few people who recognize it. I think in the end, mostly I'm interested, particularly today, like, you know, because indie games, as you know, a lot of I personally believe that a lot of indie games that we play sort of live in this shadow of this flourishing of independent games that happened about like 20 years ago. And I think that when I compare that to some of the earlier periods in gaming, so, you know, the time when, you know, genres are being born. I mean, genres are still being born now, but like alongside Civilization, you know, you have any number of games which utterly defy categorization. So today, not only is our idea of an indie game sort of 20 years old, but it sometimes can feel like all of the good ideas have already been had. And then when you see a game like Cultist Simulator or Book of Hours, it reminds you that there are still things that, you know, I don't mean to suggest that, you know, games need to be cut from whole cloth. Like, you know, obviously you refer to the things that have come before and you learn those lessons, but it is always very interesting, I think, when people either explicitly ask the question or the game sort of raises the question, well, why have you always done it this way? Like, what is it required that this be the, you know, that this be a convention? And in some cases the answer is yes, but I think RPGs like Book of Hours have shown that there are other ways to have a role-playing experience in a digital environment that doesn't necessarily follow what most people would think of as an RPG. And I think there's something fun about that. Okay. So this is me getting the impulse. We'll be a little late on it, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take... Shoot. Yeah, we'll read the Cosley work. And then I think we'll go back to the moor. Last leaves toss and scutter. So I'm going to need to make a decision whether or not I want to excuse me, read any more books tomorrow. So Transformations and Liberations probably isn't a very good idea. But the manner in which the alchemist was spared seems like a pretty straightforward one. And the messenger awaiting her destination, door and wall. That one will be a little harder, but not too difficult. So there it is in Gabino Tizzer. Mrs. Kill, as every local gossip knows, came from France to marry Mr. Kill, but there's scant trace of the continent in her accent now. It's just going to take a second here because we can still recover this. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, we just need one more. Night has fallen, dawn will come soon. An afternoon spent profitably reading newspapers to the curious, writing affectionate letters for the lonely, steering farmers through the requirements of the Ministry of Agriculture. Be careful on the timings of these things. The Shadow and the Stair. Ernestine Peterhans records her conversations with the little darkness in Hush House's Stair Tenebris, which she calls Donkerling. Ernestine's business in the cellars of Hush House often took her up and down the Stair Tenebris, although it is avoided by every other servant. Donkerling attempted first to consume her and then to demand sacrifices from her. Ernestine consented to bring it mice, but became very stern when asked for a new drowned child. Donkerling claims to be an imprisoned long under the protection of the deepest power of the sea. It is prone to occasional bouts of raving about how, when it has its freedom, its patron will drown the isle. Ernestine renders most of these long speeches as an ellipsis, but is very interested in what it can tell about the circumstances of shipwrecks. There are hints that she may have been planning a salvage expedition. Impulse. Doesn't exactly make sense, but I understand it anyway. Okay, so let's get transformations and liberations leveled up. So the metal, the lesson. There's always more to learn. Improve the skill to level 9. I didn't do myself any favors by moving all of these so low, so I will take a minute to decide which of these I might want to take overnight. Of course, we'll see what Mrs. Kill gives me first. Okay, there it is in Camino Tizzer. Mrs. Kill, as every local gossip knows, came from France to marry Mr. Kill, but there's scant trace of the continent in her accent now. So, one of the things I can do to improve my my chances, so let's say I'm going to go for door and wall. We can take a look at door and wall and see, okay, we need forge and we need knock. So then the question becomes, okay, do I have any forge and knock that I can... I can sort of bring overnight. And unfortunately, I don't think I can take the regret because the Violet Chamber won't let me take Winter or Forge. No. So in this case, it's kind of up to me to decide what to keep. I think I'll take the Wind Rumor just because it's the sort of thing that I can't get from a conversation with one of the villagers. But the big one that I wanted to hang on to was just the Newman. Again, it's trying to make the most of the day and the elements of the soul. Towards a fundamental aesthetic, or the House of Glass, Julian Cosley considered this his masterwork. Techniques for perception and analysis which permit invidious and apocalyptic conclusions. Probably the most assiduously suppressed book in history. The entire run was destroyed. Even the presses were melted and dispersed, but the manuscript edition has survived. The perfect hegemony of the hours is perhaps eternal, but Cosley proposes and describes confinement inescapable, aesthetic and optical techniques which might contain even an hour, profoundly disrupting the order of the Mansis. He presents this as his own work, but there are hints here and there that he received inspiration or even assistance from the nowhere hour named Snow. I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, but I was actually on, and it was in a museum, and there was a book, which I now have a copy of, incidentally. But at the time, the book was something that was only ever intended for private collections. I think there were only 10 copies made. I'm trying to remember the exact number. Anyways, it doesn't really matter on the details. But there was a limited number of copies made and fairly carefully sort of held on to. I also believe a number of them were destroyed. But in order to retain the secret, the printing press was also bought. So again, obviously this book survived, and the printing press survived, and it was acquired as part of this museum. But it was very interesting. I having now seen the press and now own the book. I saw this exhibit after playing Book of Hours, so I immediately thought of Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic. But it's always funny. I mean, the other thing too is because the developers of this game are so it's not just well read, but just very intelligent, right? Although probably being well read is the one that would make it here. It's impossible to know which of these are like coincidences and which of these are intentional. But to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter, because I think a lot of people have enjoyed this experience of seeing the secret histories as presented, right? So, however you're interested in looking at it, whether you think of the different, principles, or whether you like thinking about the specific hours, or, any of these things, it's all, or even just the idea of whether you have a little bit of dread or fascination for the day, whatever it is, I always think it's kind of fun to just add that new perspective, especially like when you take a look at like symbols for organizations or something like that, and just to sort of see these representations from the game's world. It's, to me, I think quite fun and interesting. So what was I going to say? For me, like being able to go to something like a museum and see something like that, again, it's just one of these ways that I get my hours of enjoyment out of a Weather Factory game, but there's sort of a surplus enjoyment that comes from there's the surplus enjoyment that sort of comes from the fact that when I go through the day, there might be one or two things that just have a little extra touch of magic because it makes me think of the game. Again, I'm obviously the intended audience for something like this, so I don't know if this is what everybody else's experience is like, but it's very fun. Everything ultimately comes down to a choice between eternity and history. There's only one place you're safe from both, and it's not a place anyone would want to be. It's a prison that can only exist in certain histories. Okay. So I think we're good for the day. Although I'm wondering... Oh, right. Gathering. Alright, the skill is now level 9. Its power aspects have also increased. Forge and Moth are less different than we think. Every change is in some way a release. I hope we finish before the day crosses over. No! Oh, just made it. Unexpected finds in the folds of earth and sky. Now this is where I'm not role-playing, because there is no way I would lug a piece of stone like this far into the... Actually, you know what? We can put that in the... Did I mention, by the way, that this is Gervenius Van Loren? I don't know. If you don't know the answer to this, by the way, does anybody have a guess as to where he should go? Because I believe we have been given information in terms of where he should be. Okay, so today's work. So I was going to try the messenger awaiting her destination, but I should actually make sure that I am capable of reading this. So we would want a forge desk. So we would take the metal. Clearly we would use transformations and liberations here. We would add vac. That is not vac, that's... there we go. Alright, so we are 4 short. So what exactly was my plan here? Interesting. Well, I mean, there's no point in sorry, hang on a second. There's no point in letting Autumn go to waste, so I'm going to bring in Mrs. Kill, just because, I might as well. Mrs. Kill's mood always improves when I drop by. If you don't choose a topic, Mrs. Kill will offer help as a friend. Mrs. Kill stands ready to help. You always cheer me up, she says morosely. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do here, I'll use a Trist and a Fett to Generate some forge memories that I need. We'll read the glossed version of Radical Measure for the pattern. And we'll read one of the Foresight books. I don't think I read The Chandler's Wish recently. Should probably at some point read the Incandescent Tantra again, but... yeah, so I'm going to need at least a minute before I can read that book. Yeah, no. We can save the manner in which the alchemist was spared for a future reading. This definitely makes Messenger awaiting her destination an even higher priority. Okay, I think in this case it is actually going to be all hands on deck to get that book read. It's probably overkill, but I want to make a go of it. I've carried a memory like a flambeau safe through the mazes of night. This will complete once dawn has come. And actually, we're at the half-hour mark, so let's see if we can read the book and get the lessons that we need in time for the weekend. So thank you, everybody, for watching. I will see you tomorrow in the next one. Take care.